The biggest thing I say is really work on your communication skills, work on how you're explaining your value. It's the biggest issue I see with people who are individual contributors. A lot of them come to me and say, oh, like my managers just don't get it. I keep telling them we got to do outcomes and we got to do this type of agile stuff. They don't care. What your leaders care about is making money and furthering the business
Yeah.
value. So tell them how you're solving customer problems that create business value.
Hello, and welcome to the Product People podcast. Here we learn from the most amazing people in the product space for 30 minutes at a time. At Product People, our mission is to help companies discover and deliver great products faster. We do that by doing hands-on product management work at companies of all sizes, and also by sharing knowledge generously with our community of more than 20,000 product enthusiasts. My name is João Moita, and today we have Melissa Perri with us. Melissa is one of the most iconic names in the product management space. She's the author of Escaping the Build Trap, she's an educator at Product Institute, and she hosts the Product Thinking podcast. I hope you enjoyed this insightful chat. What has changed regarding diversity, gender in particular, but diversity in general as well, in the product space over the last few years?
Ooh, I will say we are having a lot more prominent women in product management, which is great, even though we're not always included on the lists. And I see a lot of people go after everybody on LinkedIn for that, but which I appreciate because I think there's a lot of us working hard on those things. But I do see a lot more women getting into the product management space, which is great. I do think we have an issue in some companies, and I've seen this a lot, where we do build our teams to be mostly male. And when we were originally interviewing for product management or thought about product management in the tech space a while ago, a lot of Google's first thinking about product management prevailed, which is you need to be a coder. So a lot of people stayed away from product management, or they were met with these interviews where people were asking them to code and they went, oh, you can't be a product manager unless you code. And a lot of women were turned off by that, I think. There are a lot of great female programmers out there who've done great work, but I think we're missing the bigger picture about product management. And I always tell people, you don't need to code to be a great product manager. You need to have extreme empathy for your users and a really good business mindset so that you can understand problems and turn it into something that's going to be impactful for the business. And I do think women are great at that. We are typically good at empathizing. We are typically good at understanding other people's needs, putting ourselves in other shoes. And that's why I think women make great product managers. And we do need to recognize that in the
Yeah.
industry too. Now, there's been a lot of situations too where I've come into companies, and I worked at one for a while too, where predominantly your customers are women, especially in your consumer companies. Yeah,
hmm
most of the product managers are men. And you start to miss things and miss opportunities that you could have for your company. And I get pushback, and I did get pushback when I worked for this one company that, oh, but the men can empathize with women. Sure, they can. But you don't have the same experiences that some women have. And
Right.
that makes a big gap if you're not taking into consideration their thoughts, their solutions, how they think about problems too. So I do think you just need to have a well-rounded team at the end of the day. And it's not just about, gender. It's also about diversity of thought. And your experiences as a woman are different than your experiences as a man. They're going to be different. My experience as a white woman is very different than the experiences of a black woman or somebody else. And you need to really make sure that you're encompassing all those different ways of thinking, all those experiences, all those backgrounds into the way that you approach things. And if we just hire a homogenous group of people into our, whatever that homogenous group is too, right, into our company, then you're not going to get the benefits of all that thought. So that's why I believe diversity is really important, because we're out here solving things for people in unique ways. The way that you win as a company is to find a unique solution to a problem. And if you don't really deeply understand that problem, you better find the people who do. And that's the only way you're going to come up with great solutions. So sure, we can always study, we can always be better empathizers, but you want the different perspectives in your company so that you can brainstorm with those different perspectives. So it's not just gender, it's backgrounds, like people coming from, different people who lived in different countries, people who grew up poor, people who grew up, they're going to have very different experiences than people who grew up wealthy. Not everybody has to be from an Ivy League school. Like everybody, just having the different experiences there is really important. And especially like hiring people with disabilities, to make sure that you're ADA compliant and that, they can bring some thought into how you design things to make sure that it's appropriate for everybody.
Yeah.
We can't just
Accessibility.
hire all the same type of people. And I'm saying too, it's not good to just hire a 100% group of white women to run your product team either. Like that's probably bad as well. Like
Mhm.
hire a diverse group of people, hire people who
Right.
have different experiences, hire people who have different backgrounds, hire people who are going to approach problems in different ways.
That's great. Yeah, that's a great reminder for everyone building a product team to include diverse backgrounds. Cool. Let's jump to something that a lot of people know you for, which is your book, Escaping the Build Trap. And for someone who never read your book, which I guess from our audience, a lot of people will have read it, why should they read it? What does it cover?
So I wrote Escaping the Build Trap because I kept running into this issue with companies. I'd come in and train people in good product management practices, and it wasn't enough. Right? I'd be like, "Okay, let's go do, like, our workshops, let's do our schools," and, we teach them the stuff that I teach through Product Institute, and I'd come into the organization and, like, nothing has moved, nothing has changed, people are still frustrated. Product managers are like, "Hey, I'm not allowed to do the things that you taught me. What am I supposed to do now?" And I realized that it was really systemically bigger than just being able to go through the motions and the practices of doing product management. It was about looking at your organization in a way that really built in how to solve problems for customers with great solutions. And the build trap's this place where you get stuck as a company where you're really just concentrating on building software and shipping as many features as
Yeah.
fast as possible. So your focus really goes more towards outputs instead
Hmm.
of the outcomes. And I'm sure all the product people out there listening have heard about this before. But what does that really mean? It means that we go and we say, "Hey, we shipped that feature. Success. We did it." But you don't know what that feature did for the customer. You don't know if it solved its problem. You don't know if it actually had, reached the goals that you set out to achieve with the business, like increasing your retention. Did it increase retention or did it not increase retention? Sometimes we don't even write down what we think those features will do. We just come up with solutions and ship them. So a lot of companies really get stuck in the bill trap. If you're a younger company, if you're like a startup, you have to get out of the bill trap early. Otherwise, you'll just fail. And that's probably why you don't hear of a
Yeah.
lot of startups. A lot of them just fail because they get stuck in the bill trap. They're solving a problem that was not worth solving and they go out of business. It happens when you don't have a lot of cash. But there's a lot of really big companies too stuck in the bill trap.
Yeah.
And they have enough cash to keep going for a very long time. And they won't run out of cash because they have like such a foothold, but eventually they will get disrupted. And you do see a lot of companies coming out there and scaring places. Like Stripe is scaring the banks because they're doing things in different ways that the banks weren't ready to do. And now they're disrupting them. They're finding different ways to do payments that the banks have never thought of. And the banks are stuck in the bill trap. A lot of them are. A lot of them are trying to get out. But they realize this and they realize that they need great product management for it. So, product management is the thing that gets you out of the bill trap. It's about really saying, all right, what are our goals as a company? What do we need to do to succeed and to achieve long term? How do I build great products that help us reach the vision of that company by solving problems for customers? And it's really about understanding this value exchange, which is, when we ship products and features as a company, they should produce value for a customer. And if they don't, then you're not going to get the business value you're expecting in return from them. So there is no value inherently in a product or feature itself unless it actually solves a problem for the customer. So we need to remember that. And as product managers, what we need to do is figure out what are those products or services and make sure that those are the ones that are getting shipped. Those are the ones that are getting prioritized that are
Nice.
actually going to produce that value. So we're kind of like value exchange managers, right? We're trying to optimize this value exchange. We're trying to make sure that it's a maximum of customer value and a maximum of business value on the other end, and figure out how to rally a team, how to get the whole company thinking about those things, how to streamline that stuff so it goes out correctly.
Cool. And you mentioned that for startups, young companies, they should get out of the build trap fast. Is that something that the companies fall into by default? How does an organization fall into the build trap?
Yeah. I don't think they do by default. Honestly, a lot of this is who are the leaders looking at, what you're doing And are you focused on problems or are you focused on solutions? The startups that fall into the build trap are purely focused on solutions and their solutions looking for a problem. They did not take the time to understand the problem well. They did not take the time to investigate the market around the problem. They did not think about a solution that scales well. And honestly, there's probably a lot of startups out there, and this is not the only thing that's going to make a startup successful. Let me say that true too. I've seen lots of solutions that solve a great problem, but they had awful marketing. They had awful sales. They were not priced correctly. There's lots of factors that can kill a startup, but this is one of the biggest ones because if you're building something like I know David Bland, my friend, likes to talk about Juicero all the time, which was let's build a $3,000 juice maker where you just put pouches in it and the juice splits out. Like that was a solution looking for a problem and it wasn't solving anybody's problem. That thing went out of business really fast, right? So
Hmm.
you as a startup, as a founder of a startup, you need to be ruthlessly obsessed with figuring out what the problems are of the customer that you're going after and making
Right.
sure that you're solving them in ways that works. And the only way that you do that is by staying close to your customer, iterating on the solutions, making sure you're getting feedback, listening to them, incorporating that into your products. So that's essential for startups, but it's also essential for big companies to do that. And what I think happens is we start growing as companies. Like a lot of startups are actually really good at doing that the early days. And then they hit this growth stage, and this is primarily where the stage I work with companies now, and they start to scale. So, as a founder, your job now, a lot of them become CEOs. Your job now is more about running the whole company. So, you have to make sure that you have people there who are staying in touch with the customer. And what I see is that as we add more layers, or let's say like people between the customer and the rest of the teams that are building products for the customers, some of the teams forget to go back to the customer. Some of the teams forget to
Yeah.
go
They lose
actually
touch.
talk to the customer, get that feedback again, because we usually have so much stuff that the customer told us that they wanted us to build that we just like concentrate on checking off the list and going down that list. And yeah, there's tons of stuff we could build. And we forget that maybe some of that's not relevant anymore. Maybe those are not the customers that we actually want to target right now. Maybe our goals have changed as a company and we do need to revisit all of those questions before we start building those. And
Yeah.
that's typically where we see a little bit bigger companies fall into the build trap or get out of that startup phase and start scaling. They're not really prioritizing, they're focusing on way too much stuff. They're taking all the feedback into account. You do want to take all the feedback into account. You just don't want to build off of all the feedback. You want to
Yeah.
prioritize that. You want to figure out what's going to work for you. And they're
Mm.
not doing the synthesizing and the iterating that they were in those early days.
Right. Cool. And on the organization level, this all comes down to incentives, like how they are set up to ensure that people focus on the right things. So,
Yeah.
what are some suggestion or some usual things that you advise companies to set up in terms of incentives to ensure that people keep those things in mind?
Yeah, a big thing is a lot of companies reward people for shipping a lot of features or getting things out on time and within budget, but they're not rewarding them for reaching outcomes. So, if you really want to reward a team, you should be giving them good goals that are outcome related. You can tie them to we believe these solutions are going to do these things, but one, you should not be tying people's bonuses to them delivering functionality. And I see so many companies do that where it's like, you only get your bonus if all this stuff is shipped by December. So what does it do? I actually worked with one company where this was the truth and it was a big company. It was a 5,000 person company. When I first came in, their bonuses were tied to shipping features. So what did they do when December rolled around? They told me, all the product managers told me this, the product leaders told me this, everybody told me this. They said, well, what we do is we just hack together whatever we can to say we shipped it. We put it out there, we get our bonuses, and then we roll it back and delete all the code and have to go back and like fix all the broken stuff. This is how people react if you hold their money into like stupid goals, to stupid
Yeah.
outputs. Like people will optimize to get money. So do not put the goals that way. Like do not do that. So I'm not an HR person, but there are a lot of ways to restructure the way people get bonuses and rewarded. You
Right.
can see if they're making contributing factors to their team to help them focus more on outcomes, to lead the team better, to get buy-in for discovering like really good opportunities. You can tie their stuff more towards solving problems or outcomes for the business holistically. And you want to do that as a team. You don't want to just reward individuals to do outcomes, it's not just the responsibility of the product manager to reach outcomes, it's the responsibility of a team. And we should remember that. So
Yeah.
I like more organizational level goals for people, help them contribute towards it. If the business does well, everybody else does well. Keep them more outcome focused, but then you can contribute, you can take portions of that and contribute to people being standout stars that really embrace the product management principles and help further the business that way.
Yeah. Yeah. And besides incentives, I think another big thing that influences it is the strategy and also how leaders set out their plans and their roadmaps, like if it's feature based or outcome based. How do you what do you see is the difference between a strategy and a plan?
Yeah, a lot of people think strategies are plans. Plans are more, we're going to go do this, then that. And what you're doing in a plan is laying out all of your stuff based on time, based on project scope, all those things. But what plans don't account for is uncertainty. And that's what a good strategy accounts for. You may get halfway into your plan and something crazy happens, like COVID, good example, right? How are you going to react to it? Do you have flexibility in your strategy to go back and say, hey, now our problems are slightly different. We need to alter this. Or did you keep people on track for a plan that no longer works? It doesn't take into account those things. So your plan should account for uncertainty. And like COVID's extreme, we had to blow up a lot of strategies then and revamp them. But I did talk to quite a few companies during this and say, like, how did you manage COVID? How did you go through it? Like I had a product of Wayfair on my, who was like a really big furniture store in the US, on my podcast. And he said our vision never changed, but the way that we actually went about achieving that vision did change with COVID. But we had a really good flexible strategy laid out that allowed us to iterate in certain places, but not blow it all up and start again. So they were
Right.
able to react very quickly and
Hmm.
to change course very quickly for certain things, but it did not kill their entire strategy. And that's what a good strategy should be. It should be about keeping a long-term vision that is, lofty and very far out, but then making sure that the building blocks of the strategy are flexible enough where you don't throw the whole company out the door when something changes, but you can iterate on that and discover it. And as you learn more and more, you can actually change it. So when I talk about strategies, I usually talk about 4 levels that we need in an organization. We need the vision of the company. We need strategic intents, which are very business focused outcomes. So it's like we want to grow our revenue by expanding geographically from North America into Europe. Great strategic intent. We've got outcomes associated with it. We would actually like figure out how much revenue we thought we could tackle in a certain amount of time. And these are like, you're not going to expand geographically in 6 months, right? Like we don't have solutions that are really high up. You are going to expand geographically over the next couple of years. Let's be realistic. So strategic intents are really long term. Now, underneath it, we have a lot of choices on how to expand geographically. And there's probably a lot of stuff that we have to do to be able to do that. So the next level down says, let's look at our products in our portfolio, understand what we have, what assets we already have, what things that we could create. And then we figure out what problems will we solve to be able to expand geographically. So, what are the different problems that Europe has than the US? How do our problems solve them right now? What needs to change? And we go and we explore that and we do the research on it. And then we can set our product initiatives, which are very problem focused. And then teams can go figure out the solutions on the features and the different products we need to build to actually get there. So we call those options because there's multiple options that we could actually take in order to do those things. But I'm not starting out October 2023 and saying, if I want to expand geographically, here's the laundry list of stuff we need to build in 2024 and committing people to that. What I'm doing instead is pointing them in a direction so that they can go figure out what it is we need to build. They can do the
Yeah.
research on that instead of me as a leader sitting up in my office, not talking to anybody, right? Coming up
Hmm.
with the stuff off the top of my head. And that's the difference between a strategy and a plan. And leaders need to give people the direction and give them the space to go out there and actually figure out what we should build because you don't have all the answers and that's okay. And it does not scale a company if you did.
Hmm.
If you had to tell everybody every little thing to do, why
Yeah.
hire people, first of all? And second of all, like that doesn't scale. That's a lot of time and energy from you doing that. So you need to make sure you're figuring out what the direction is and pointing people in the right one.
Hmm. Cool. And you touched also on something which is a bit empowering the teams to make the decisions from themselves. And this empowered product team is something that has been around in the US for a bit longer than in Europe. And I'm but I know you have worked with companies both in Europe and the US. What do you see are the main differences in the industry at the moment? Considering also that I think it's an interesting topic because a lot of our audience is based in Europe,
Mhm.
and we mostly consume content related to product management from the US, from authors like you, like Marty Kagan, etc. And some of the things are not applicable to some of the companies here. So, what are your thoughts on that topic?
I think Europe is still catching up to where we are right now. And that's I've seen that in I work with a lot of European companies, like you said. So I do see that in a lot of ways we're doing it. But I'd say you're probably 5 to 10 years earlier than the US is right now. That doesn't mean that you won't get to where we are. It's just going to take a little bit longer. And I think it's because you started a little bit later. And there was a big Silicon Valley push in the United States, and product management came out of that. Even though agile people want to say it came from Scrum, it did not. It came from Silicon Valley. And there's been product managers out in tech for a very long time. And Europe wasn't as much of a tech epicenter as it is now. Now there's fantastic tech companies all over Europe, but it just took you guys a little longer to get there, which is fine. So now we've got newer tech emerging on the scene and they're still learning product management. And there's not as many people in Europe who have done it for as long as there are people in the United States. So that's just why I think you guys are just a little bit earlier in your product management journey. That doesn't mean that it's going to last forever. And I've seen it actually pick up steam a lot, like hockey stick more like growth in the last, I'd say like 3 years, which has been really great. So I'm seeing a lot more product leaders out there who have great experience. You've seen a lot of really good companies in Europe come out of there all over the place. And those people who've
Hmm.
worked there have now gone to other companies. So we've
Yeah.
got, we had the proof points in the industry in Europe and then they reached maturity. And then a lot of those people, and they were big, and a lot of those people learned great ways of working and left, and now have started their own companies or went to smaller companies, and they're infusing those good
Mhm.
ways of working back into the companies, which is great. So it's
Yeah.
just going to scale and scale from here. From a standpoint, it's just like I said, it's early. It's not bad. It's not super different. It's just early. And you're
Mhm.
still seeing a lot of leaders not understand the benefits of being outcome focused. But you know what? I see them here too. Like I work with
Mhm. Yeah.
so like I said, I work with a lot of growth stage companies, and we get to this point, and I advise European companies. I've done a bunch of those, and I advise US companies. So seen them both. If you are a founder who's never done this before, you get to this growth stage, you're making over $10 million in ARR per year, over 20 million in ARR. You found a problem that was worth solving, and it was great. But now you're getting to this phase that you've never been through before. It's the same for US as it is for Europe. You
Mhm.
never seen product management at scale. You've never done it before. It's hard. It's hard for everybody to figure out what do you do next? How do I get the leader that's going to help me how to put this in? So there is no difference there, right? When it comes down to it
Yeah.
at the end of the day. This is a hard thing for anybody to learn. It's a hard thing for all companies to learn. And I'd say there are companies in the United States who are also 10 years behind in their product management journey, maybe
Yeah.
20. But it's not like, it's not a huge difference in anything, I think, cultural or anything,
Mhm.
bad about Europe just
Yeah.
being a little earlier on your journey. It's just that
Just a maturity issue.
it's just a maturity, right? Like, and
Mhm.
it happens with everything. There's a million companies in the US who are at the same stage. So it's like,
Yeah.
it's just that we had more people, I think, that came up in Silicon Valley and dispersed across the US because it's easier to move within borders. Think
Yeah.
about it that way.
Mhm.
And there wasn't as many tech companies in Europe. So you didn't have that influx of people who dispersed all over the country to build new companies to do that. But now you
Right.
do. So now it's
Mhm.
catching up. So
Cool.
that's only reason I think we have a difference there.
Great. Yeah. That's a great positive note for all the product companies out there in Europe. Cool. Let's jump to another topic. I know you are working on something about it, which is product operations. Before we dive in, can you provide a definition of product operations and its responsibilities within a company? Because that's a very controversial definition.
Yeah. So product operations to me and the way that we've implemented it is really about enabling great product management in your organization and scaling the product management value. So it enables decision making around your product strategy within your organization and it scales the value of product management. It is an enablement function at the end of the day. I think that's that's something that you really have to hone in on. It makes things better, it optimizes, it helps you do things at scale. That's really what it's there for.
Right. So it's not replacing necessarily a
No.
function that was already there. Cool.
No, and some companies don't have functions they should have, and I advise them to put them in. Great example, like go to go to market strategy, should live in product marketing. Tons of companies don't have product marketing teams. Please
Hmm.
stand up that team. But if you don't want to, then I, as a chief product officer, need somebody to help me with that. That's where I might have a product ops analyst fill in until we build a
Right.
robust product marketing team. I don't
Hmm.
think it should replace anything,
It's
but
an enabler. Yeah.
yeah, it's enabler, but, like, you still need certain things to do your job well as a product managers, and I
Hmm.
need the information, so I'm gonna have people do that for me.
Right. So yeah, you mentioned it's an enablement for growth. And when is it appropriate to implement product operations in terms of company size, growth stage? Where do you see it makes sense the most?
When you are a startup, you don't really need product operations when you're tiny because
Yeah.
you can get all the information pretty readily by, like, looking around, asking people questions. When you
Hmm.
start to scale, it's harder to keep track of all the things that we're actually doing as a company and to make decisions rapidly because, 1, now we've got a ton more data, got a ton more people, a lot more systems, and my decision making has to be a lot faster when I hit growth stage because I have to be able to react to new information coming in quickly and setting a path for a lot of people. So typically, you're looking at implementing product operations at its lightest form, which could be one person. When you start to scale and you say, as a product leader, I don't really know all the things that are happening on my product team. If you feel like you don't know that, or I don't have the information I need to make a product strategy decision, those are questions that I would ask yourself. And I don't care if you're 5 million at that point or 10 million in ARR, like you need some help there to be able to make decisions. So it's not really a revenue size that we're looking at. It's when you start to say, hey, we got too big or we're moving too fast where I can't make the same decisions I was and I don't have the same information I did. So I need some
Yeah.
help. Then what I'd advise is you start with like one person. And typically at a growth stage, I say you want to start with a product ops analyst who can help you pull in all the data and the outcomes that you are reaching so that you can look at it and then figure out how to set your product strategy. So I want to know like what based on my customer segments, let's say we got 3 or 4 different types of segments, what products are they buying the most? What products have the best retention for each one of those segments? Which ones have the best adoption? Which ones are they using the most? What's the feedback per segment on these types of products? What's the NPS? All these different things you need to slice and dice and be able to look at in order to set the right product strategy and know which way to go. And that's not just true for the product leaders, but also the product teams. And sometimes that information, ideally, you automate that information, you have it somewhere where you don't need a product ops analyst doing this every day. Like the goal is to automate somebody out of this job. But if you
Yeah.
don't have that yet, you need somebody to think through, pull all the information out of different systems, work across functionally between sales, getting the feedback, between finance, getting the feedback, all those things to put it together in a view where product managers can look at it and make decisions. So that is one aspect that I think is incredibly important. And it's
Yeah.
not data analysis from like a machine learning or scientist perspective. It's like data analysis from a reporting perspective, right? Of like slicing and dicing things in ways where you can make decisions.
Right. And also, this topic has generated a lot of controversial and divergent opinions. I listened to your podcast episode making the case of for product operations with Denise Stiles, and also there's that infamous or famous article from Marty Kagan, the process people. From all these discussions, and there's been a lot of discussion going on, how would you summarize the arguments in favor and against setting a product operations function in an organization?
So where Marty gets upset is because he sees he's one understand that he's working with a lot of really large companies, and this is where he sees it. Large companies tend to do things not great. But this was what he was observing because I talked to him about it. He was seeing that a lot of people were spending a lot of effort in standardizing roadmaps, but they were never moving on from roadmaps. That's fair. Like, that's not the only thing you need to standardize in product ops. So, we have one pillar of product ops that we talk about, which is about standardizing some processes and some templates that are communication tools. I do believe you need to standardize roadmaps across a large organization. If you're the chief product officer of 350 teams, and you have no idea what everybody's working towards because your roadmaps are at 18 different levels and 457 different formats. How
Yeah.
could you possibly make a decision based off what people are doing? Right.
Right.
So I believe some big companies do start there and they start with standardizing roadmaps. And I have no problem with it because if you can't understand what your teams are working on as a product leader, you can't make decisions. So that's not a bad place to start, but you have to understand that that's not where you end. So it's not like I should have a team of 50 people working on standardizing roadmaps for the next 6 years. I need people to do that and then move on, right? And then move on to, okay, let's get metrics out of, pigeonholed out of all these different systems so we can actually look at it. Let's go look at the way that we do reporting on strategy and the way that we talk about our outcomes and the way that we set it. So those types of things need to be done too. And I think that's where the misconception that Marty's talking about comes from product ops, and we've talked about it. It's not just about standardizing processes, but it's okay to start there if that's the information that you need to make a decision as a product leader first. You just have to make sure you're moving on.
Right. That's a lot of great insight. Thank you for that. I have a bit of a personal question for you. So, what do you see as the next step for you in your career?
Ooh, I don't know. I've been going through this, so I'm not sure. I don't have an answer for you, but I've been
Okay.
thinking about it. One thing that I love doing, I will say right now, is board roles. So
Right.
I've stopped consulting as deeply with companies. I will come on and do a workshop for you, no problem, but I'm not going to be on site like I used to all the time. But I'm still doing all my training, still doing Product Institute, still do CPO Accelerator. And that's been very exciting because we have seen a lot of people from CPO Accelerator go to get their first CPO jobs or retain the CPO jobs if they were first time CPOs. So
Right.
I'm getting a lot of energy from that, which is great. One thing that I really like in besides teaching, because I do miss companies, is doing board advisory roles. So I had my first
Right.
one with Forsta. That was really fun. So I like working with companies, specifically gross B2B companies. They are that are like have product problems they want to solve. I love getting into different industries, and I've done like almost every industry now. I've healthcare, banking, market research, like
Cool.
literally everything, oil and gas, like all over the place. I like seeing like how people solve these problems. I like understanding different
Yeah.
problems and I like looking at them because I'm not the startup crazy person who's like, "Hey, I have a great problem to solve," and is going to go build the next Facebook. Like that's not me. I'm
Hmm.
the person who likes to go, "Wow, that was a cool problem you discovered. This is a great solution. Let's make it
Hmm.
better." Right? And that's
Yeah.
kind of where I go, and I like scaling
Right.
things. That's more of where my sweet spot is. So I hope to do more board roles, more
Hmm.
advisory roles. I've been doing that with a couple companies,
Yeah.
and those are fun to me because I like
Sure.
seeing all these ideas I never was going
Yeah.
to come up with
Mm.
myself.
Problem solving on the whole spectrum. I think that's
Yeah.
a common trait of product managers, like sniffing around for the next problem to tackle. That's super cool. Nice. And do you have some advice in particular that you would give to someone on an individual contributor role as a PM that would like to make a jump to a product leader position?
Yeah, the biggest thing I say is really work on your communication skills. Work on how you're explaining your value. It's the biggest issue I see with people who are individual contributors. A lot of them come to me and say, "Oh, like my managers just don't get it. I keep telling them we got to do outcomes and we got to do this type of agile stuff." They don't care. What your leaders care about is making money and furthering the business
Mm.
value. So tell them how you're solving customer problems that create business value. Relate all of your work up to how it's going to further the business, and that's how people get ahead. And if you can nail that communication and deeply understand as well where your leaders are coming from, also
Right.
like what do they enjoy? What makes them successful, right? That's what's going to get you ahead. That's what's going to get you recognized. So while we all know that we should be, as individual contributor product managers, working in certain ways, yelling at people that they're not letting you work in those ways is not going to get you ahead. So you have to really figure out how to talk the talk of the rest of the business and relate all the work that you're doing back to that.
Right. That's amazing advice. And yeah, thank you so much. This has been a really fun and interesting conversation. And thanks a lot for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to this Product People podcast episode. Make sure to follow our show on your favorite podcast app so that you don't miss the upcoming conversation with inspiring product leaders. We'd be really happy if you can rate our show on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, or if you share it with someone who might find it interesting. To find out more about us and access our community, check our website, getproductpeople.com, or head over to our YouTube, LinkedIn, or Meetup pages. You can find all the links in the episode description. See you next time.